Okay, so the generation game. Basically this came out of constantly hearing the same thing from visiting speakers that have meetings here in Tyrone and other places. Where are all the young people? I've heard the same thing for years. It's like the people we're talking to are getting older and older and older. Where are the young people? Exactly. That's why I'm so blessed when he comes. He belongs here. We came because we wanted to. He came because he was born into it. It's much better. How are we going to reach young people that we need for the next step in Yahweh's plan? How are we going to engage with them? How are we going to train them if they're not here? Well, for a start, we can't reach them unless we know where they are. We think we know where they are, but I think you'd get a surprise if you knew where some of them were. The whole Messianic growth movement in the 1960s, the late 60s, came about because young people were either checking out of society, rebelling against it, or getting redeemed in large numbers. There was nothing in between. They were either checking out, they were rebelling, or they were getting redeemed. All in large numbers. There was a complete upheaval going on. And because they were getting redeemed in large numbers from lots of different backgrounds and cultures, particularly in the States, they were finding that the places that they went was like stepping onto a different planet. They needed places where they could relate. They needed places where they could feel comfortable. They needed relevant places to fellowship and to get real answers and not just speeches and platitudes. They needed sound teaching. So what was the problem? The problem was that there was a massive cultural gap that needed filling to be able to bridge the increasingly wider generation gap and retain them. I see so many groups, and all the kids go through the youth group, and then they all leave the youth group, and very occasionally, a bit later on, some of them make it back. But in general, it's a revolving door. Once they've had their fun, they go out there to have even more fun. Not all, but a lot. So what's our answer? That was their answer in the 60s. New fellowships sprang up. New communities sprang up. Because they suddenly had an influx of people. And they didn't have the leadership or the buildings or anything else prepared, ready to receive them and give them what they needed. So like I say, what's our answer for today's media generation? Religious rock music? When we were over in Europe, our kids went to music festivals and they said, oh, it must have been the Lord, because they had this satanic punk band on stage, but it was okay because they were throwing Bibles to the people in the audience. And to them, that made it okay. The music was absolute garbage. It's just another drug. Social clubs, is that the answer? We keep being told we need to provide more entertainment for them. Shall we all go on social media and reach them? Twitter them and tweet them and Facebook them. Or do we just carry on with more business as usual meetings? I believe our core message is the same today as it's always been. It's not the message we need to change, it's the delivery. After all, truth's still truth. Same yesterday, today and forever. But just maybe we need to ask Yahweh how to deliver it with more precision and penetration in today's fast-paced, multimedia, information-driven society. Because let's face it, if we don't understand the issues involved, how can we find a solution? If you don't see a problem, you won't bother solving it. There's no need. If there's no problem, you don't need to solve it. Some people just ignore it and say there's no problem. But if we don't solve it and fill the current void, the enemy certainly can and will. A vacuum is not a good thing, because if one thing doesn't fill it, something will. So either we fill the gap, either we fill the vacuum, or the enemy will. And he is doing. So what are the keys? I believe that we desperately need to raise the bar. We need to stop lecturing to them and start living the message through a united, clearly defined, community-based lifestyle that's lived out on a daily basis. Like I say many, many times, people are sick of hearing about it, they want to see it. Stop telling us about it and show us. Am I saying that we're to be perfect? Of course not. All he's asking us to be is honest, sincere and obedient. He's asking us to show unconditional love and forgiveness every day of the week, not just on one of them. Not just to one another, because we know one another and we're all redeemed. He's asking us to make that our normal way of behaviour, no matter where we are and who we're with. He's asking us to begin intercession that focuses on lifting up the Messiah and portraying him as he really is. A relevant, up-to-date, complete alternative to the flood of revived ancient pagan practices that are portrayed as normal today. Portrayed as entertaining. Witches and wizards and vampires. It's so entertaining. The enemy's filling the vacuum. And because they're portrayed as normal, it's just an excuse for them to live a morally bankrupt lifestyle, answerable to no one, but at the same time blaming everyone for the consequences. So they can do what they like, nobody can tell them what to do, but everybody else has to behave so that they don't have to live with the consequences. Yeshua is quite clear when he makes the promise to personally draw all people into his body, his redeemed community here on earth. But only as we lift him up. That's all he asks. I will draw them if you lift them up. You lift them up and they will come. But when we lift him up, we need to show him as he really is. And not just as some counterfeit religious historical icon that's just for old people. By the way, old people is defined as over 30. In fact, I'm not even sure if that's the benchmark anymore. It could be a lot less. And these old people seem to be stuck in a bizarre, confusing, alternative religious reality time warp. That's what they see. That's what they hear, if they listen. So like anything like that, if you've got a problem, you go back to the instruction manual. How did Yeshua do it? Did he decide to start a trendy under-13s group and appoint a youth pastor? Why 13? Because over 13 they were adults. There were no teenagers. Under 13 were the young people. Over 13 were adults. They didn't have iPods and cell phones. Did he start a children's church designed to separate the age groups from one another and actually cause a generation gap? See, I understand you've got to reach people at a different age, but by doing it, you're actually creating the very things you're trying to break down. You're saying that they're different from them, and they're different from them, and they shouldn't get together. So what did he do? He simply told the truth in a way that everyone and anyone at any level could understand. And then he let the rest fill in the gaps. And in fact he told his own Talmud not to prevent young people from spending time with them. Can you imagine most of these mega churches, the children getting anywhere near the pastor? It's hard enough for the adults. They often have to go on a 6-month waiting list just to speak to him. Kids don't stand a chance. He also said, fathers, don't irritate your children and make them resentful. Now there's a trick I'd like to learn. How not to. It would be nice if we could do it, but it seems like whatever you say, it irritates them. And whatever you try and do, it makes them resentful. I think it's part of the rule book. So I'm looking forward to learning that one. But he issues the antidote to it, and he says, raise them with the Lord's kind of discipline. What's the Lord's kind of discipline? Why is it different from our discipline? How does he treat us? The way he treats us is his kind of discipline. And so the way he treats us is the way we need to treat them. Of course, the problem these days is this can only happen if the child actually has access to a father. In particular, a father who can and will raise them. It's a big problem. We're living in a fatherless generation, spiritually and physically. And even more particularly, they need a father who lives, demonstrates and follows the Lord's discipline himself. You can't teach what you haven't got. Shaul pinpoints the problem when he tells Timothy to keep safe what has been entrusted to you. Turn away from the ungodly babblings and the argumentative opposition of what is falsely called knowledge. It's the same problem today. We live in a society that's obsessed with knowledge and information. It's a Greek philosophy. Whether you like it or not, we're living in a Greek society. In terms of its function. All about knowledge. For many who promise this knowledge have missed the mark as far as Yahweh's way is concerned. Grace be with you. And this is coming from a guy that was trained up to be the next Kohen Hagadol, the next chief rabbi. This is a guy that was taught knowledge more than anybody else. And yet he's saying, for many who promise this knowledge have missed the mark as far as Yahweh's way is concerned. Grace be with you. And yet an even stronger warning is given by Yeshua himself when he says, yes, I tell you, that unless you change and become like little children, you won't even enter the kingdom of heaven. They're asking who's the greatest. And he's saying, look, unless you change things, you won't even get in, let alone be the greatest. So the greatest in the kingdom is the person who makes themselves as humble as this child. And in fact, whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. But whoever ensnares one of these little ones who trust me, it would be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and be drowned in the open sea. Pretty strong language. And don't forget, as always, he's talking about being childlike, not childish. So do we need to be humble? Yes. Do we need to welcome young people as valuable assets and not disposable liabilities? Yes. Do we need to demonstrate our message by our actions? Yes. Do we have the right to snare them by lying to them? No. Well then stop telling them about Christmas, and stop telling them about Easter, and stop telling them about the tooth fairy and all the other rubbish that they tell them. And then the minute they get old enough, they realise you've been lying to them, and so as far as they're concerned, you can't be trusted. What else have they told us that is a lie? No. To teach man-made tradition, myths and legends as if it were doctrine, no. And in fact he exposes those who do that by telling them, you've made a fine art of departing from Yahweh's command in order to keep your traditions. Tradition. It's a good Jewish concept, but it keeps people locked into the past. Keeps people locked into man-made traditions and not Yahweh's traditions. And we have to be able to distinguish and discern between the two. And then what do? They challenge him about the source of his own teaching. Big mistake. And he answers them by saying, my teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. We need to be able to turn around to people and say, my teaching is not my own. It comes from the one who sent me. Isn't it about time that we spoke out and exposed and stopped the myth that we have no need of one another? It's just the same with young people and older people as it is with Jew and Gentile and with groups around the world and different nations and different tribes, all yelling at each other, we have no need of you. Of course we have need of each other. Because the relentless media propaganda is designed to keep young people and older people completely apart and stop them from trusting one another. The whole thing is geared towards that goal of stopping younger people and older people trusting one another, including parents and grandparents. And the goal is the enemies, and it's to drive a massive wedge between the two groups in our Western style societies. We are either told that it's a young people's world and that the old are an unaffordable burden on society, or we're told that the young are totally selfish, stupid, self-absorbed, self-destructive and don't care about anything or anybody. And people swallow these lies, and what it does is it keeps the two groups apart. And the only thing that's going to set it free is the truth. The reality is that the young are being robbed of the wisdom, history and life experiences that they need and deserve from older people. And the old are being stripped of their manner, their dignity, their respect, and the opportunity to give back and feel useful. What's the point of spending all these years learning stuff if you can't do anything with it? It's pointless. Both groups are being robbed of a very special relationship. And it's a relationship that only exists between grandparents and grandchildren, or older people and younger people. It's a special relationship. It skips a generation. How do I know? Because I have a totally different relationship with my grandchildren than I do with my children. It's a completely open one. We trust each other. We just enjoy each other. We just love each other. No hassles. No, you did this to me, and you wrecked my life, and you... There's a special relationship there, and it was designed to be that way. Because the young need what the grandparents can give them, and the grandparents need what the young people, their grandchildren, can give to them. We need one another. It's a deep, time-rich interaction. We have time to give them. The parents don't have time. That's the one thing you'll find with grandchildren. They love the fact that we can give them the greatest gift that they want, and that's time. The parents are being robbed of that time so that they can't interact. But grandparents can make the time and spend it with them and give them the time. Give them undivided attention. It's a deep, time-rich interaction. It's a two-way mutual transaction that enriches the lives of both. If a craftsman doesn't have an apprentice, then his skills and his craft will be lost when he dies. And if there are no other craftsmen, he's the last craftsman, and he doesn't take an apprentice and pass on what he's learned, that craft will die. It's the same thing with grandparents and grandchildren, parents and children, older people and younger people. If we don't give them what we've got, then we won't have any wise, effective older people. They'll have nothing to pass on because they've received nothing. We need to be engaged in all-out spiritual warfare against these spiritual forces driving this evil agenda. We're not wrestling against flesh and blood. We're wrestling against principalities and powers who have an agenda. I was reading the other day about this billionaire in America. And he is the one that's funding Hillary Clinton's campaign more than anybody else. But he's also funding all of the left-wing terror groups around the world. Any group that wants to overturn the status quo, any group that wants to flood the society and change it into a different anarchy-style society, he's funding it. He has an agenda. He's completely left-wing. He wants countries to become unstable. He wants people groups to become unstable. He wants young people and old people to have nothing to do with each other. He has an agenda, and I'm sure there are many others, and we know who he's working for. So we need to be engaged, and we need to warfare against the spiritual forces driving this evil agenda before the gap gets even wider. There is a huge gap between those of us in the baby boomer generation and Gen Y. They even give them names now, and you don't just wait 10 or 20 years for the next generation. It's every couple of years now. Every year, every couple of years. Suddenly there's another group. But there's a huge gap between us. Because what we think we're saying And the actual message that's being received by them is being totally lost in translation. We think we're telling them something, and they're hearing something totally different. Mainly because we're talking about it and not showing them. They need our knowledge and wisdom. And we need their energy and enthusiasm. We both have something that each other needs. They need our guidance and vision. And we need their childlike, not childish, childlike trust and optimism. We both need each other. We become old, cynical and jaded. We need there's nothing more exciting than somebody who's just got redeemed. It drives us crazy, but it's exciting. Because we remember what we were like then. And they've got an energy, and they've got a vision, but they need guidance. We need each other. They put their foot on the gas and we use the steering wheel. Will we need to adapt and change? Of course we will. But so will they. Will we need to take some radical action? Of course we will. Both of us, both groups. The question is, are we willing to make the effort? Are we willing to learn new tricks? Those old dogs among us will know what I'm saying. They're actually old tricks, but we need to relearn them. But I've always done it this way. How's it working for you? Are we willing to let our Abba turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous to make ready for Yahweh a people? See, when it's translated properly, it makes a big difference. We hear them turning the hearts of the fathers to the children, you say, oh yeah. But when you actually read the whole proper translation, it says, turning the hearts of the fathers to the children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous. Why? To make ready for Yahweh a people. Not a youth group, not an old age pension group, a people, a whole, complete, balanced people ready for Him. There's a phrase He wants us to totally abolish, no more of, but we've always done it this way. No more generational segregation. It's like a youth-senior apartheid. The two are kept completely apart. Because they're completely apart, they don't understand each other, they don't listen to each other. They don't realise that there's something missing in their lives. How many old people's villages do you go to? And they're lonely. Young people don't visit. It's out of bounds to young people. They're being robbed. The older people are being robbed and the younger people are being robbed. They both are robbed in that transaction. So no more generational segregation, no more labels, no more snares, no more judgment. Yeshua debated the rabbis in the temple courts when he was 12. And we say, oh, what do young people know? He's a 12-year-old taking on the rabbis in the temple courts. Why? Because he was preparing to become a bar mitzvah at 13, a son of the commandment. But then he started his public ministry at the age of 30. Between that 13 and 30, he had a lot to learn. And in Jewish society, yes, you become a man at 13, but you do not get your hands on the family business till you're 30. That's standard. And at the other end of the spectrum, Abraham was 80 when he began the exodus from Egypt. Hang on, what have I put? No. Abraham was 80 when he began the exodus from what is now Syria. No, it was from Egypt. Yeah. It's all right. I'm mixing up Abraham and Moshe. So let's change that to Moshe was 80. Moshe was 80 when he began the exodus from Egypt, and he was 120 when he died on the wrong side of the river. So he was still leading them at 120. But what did he do? He relinquished his leadership to Yehoshua, the young man that he mentored right from when they left Egypt. Right from when he left Egypt, he spent time with him, he talked to him, he mentored him, and when they finally got there, he handed over leadership to him. If he hadn't done that, who was he going to give the leadership to? The guys that wanted to go back to Egypt? No. Some other old man? No. They needed somebody with young and with energy to go in there and take the land. Joseph was 17 when he left for Egypt. What age was he when he became second only to Pharaoh? 30. Same thing. He left for Egypt when he was 17. He started his public ministry at 30. And he became Egypt's ruler. And just like Yeshua started his public ministry. So it's not about young or old. It's both. You can't have one without the other. It doesn't work. The body doesn't function unless the old and the young come together in balance. There isn't meant to be any separation. That's just something that society's placed on us. In other parts of the world, older people are an integral part of the family. So you have younger people. The young children look after the younger children. The parents look after the children. The grandparents look after the children. The young help the grandparents. It's an integral society, and we've lost that. And a lot of that happened in the 60s. And right now, the enemy and the political rulers are trying to continue that agenda. So it's not just about young or old, it's about both working in partnership together, trusting one another. They can't trust one another unless they know one another and spend time with one another. Because it's based on relationships and not prejudice. So our question today is, who's going to step up to the plate? Who's going to invite the young people to join us? I see lots of groups out there wanting to get young people to join them, but it's a recruiting tool. And they basically provide them with a social club. It's not what's needed, and it's not what the young people are looking for. They're not stupid. They're looking for reality. They're looking for truth. And what will engage them is when they see the truth in action. They'll want to be a part of it. Who's going to step up to the plate as a way of restoring the generational balance necessary to fulfill the Great Commission? Whatever's challenging us today is no more complacency and apathy. We need to get out there and find the 99ers, the missing in action lambs. There's lots of 99ers, there's lots of missing in action lambs. And if we don't get to them first, the wolves will. And they'll sink their teeth into them. So shalom ro'eh, shepherds, shalom.